for the family, standing for the church, and laboring to return to a moral and biblically based culture. This is the American Family Association and AFA Today.
And we are live from New York in the regular studios of AFA Today, ready to talk about the biggest stories of today. You see a very sunny day here in New York, and we've got some very interesting news coming from the Supreme Court today. But we've also got other big stories that we want to get to. So it's going to be a very fast-moving hour, and I'm grateful that you're with us from New York each weekday at 1 o'clock Eastern, 12 Central, to take a midday look at the news and what is happening, and then to point you to resources that can help you get involved. The Supreme Court releasing today, as we all expected, the decisions in the two primary marriage cases that had been brought before the court in the last session. And I don't know how many of you were listening at the time, but a number of weeks ago when the arguments were being had, I said at the time that I was very, very pessimistic about the outcomes of what these cases would look like before the Supreme Court for a couple of reasons. One was I noticed that in the Prop 8 case, before the Supreme Court, that there was a very significant question of standing, whether or not the defendants of the law would be recognized by the court as people that had the right to appeal the case, and whether or not they would say that appealing to them directly was the way to go. People had different feelings about how they felt the arguments were made at the time, but that hung in the back of my head. It was one of those things that I couldn't quite get past and never really felt good about. And sure enough, in the Prop 8 case in California, what the court said is that we basically have no business hearing this case. They're sending it back to the lower court, and they're expecting that lower court to address it and to allow for an appeals process to be processed through the state court system. They're just basically punted on the entire issue. However, if you read the news headlines across the news reporting this morning, everyone is saying that this paves the way for same-sex marriages to be restarted in the state of California. And I have to think, and one of those saying this is the governor of California. I have to think that if they believe that is in fact the case, with the decidedly one-party view that you're getting out of D.C. and the decidedly one-party view that is the government of the state of California, I think you're looking at a pretty uphill climb in trying to stop marriages from being issued under the banner of same-sex couples. And what's going to be interesting about that is that I think that it all but dooms the issue of marriage in the state of California long term. I think, and again, I'm just telling you my own feelings and thoughts on this. If I am reading the tea leaves, so to speak, just by the math that's on the table and the people on the ground, it is pretty obvious to me that the court was not interested in making decisions about federalism or states' rights or any of the rest of this. From both of these cases, the DOMA case and the Prop 8 case, it seems to me that what they're wanting to say, what the court is eager to say, what they are jumping on the bandwagon to say, is that there is an argument to these two cases that are rooted in what they are calling equality and fairness. And I think that you and I both know that when someone invokes that frame of reference in terms of how you frame the issue is ultimately very, very decisive in terms of deciding it. When you say, for instance, that terrorists are just disgruntled workers in committing workplace violence instead of terrorism, you frame the entire argument as to be something different than what it was. What the issue, and I've said this many times, I've proven this many times, there is no discrimination that takes place in America presently, barring people who wish to engage in homosexual behavior from getting married. Marriage has always been the recipe, if you will, of one man and one woman forming a sacred union and pledging their fidelity for life, for the welfare of their family, of the children, and of the community, so that long term another generation is brought into existence, and you continue to populate your nation because of that. That's what the purpose of marriage and the recipe of marriage is. It is not to say that people may not, and probably will, in fact, engage in many other forms of sexual coupling or tripling or other kinds of sexual activity that people will be determined by their faith, their conscience, their morals, and their values as to whether or not they are okay with those activities. But the institution, the recipe of what marriage is vital to the welfare of a nation. It's vital to the population of the next generation for a nation. And it is very important to protect that sacred union that has the potential to bring children into this world and to protect those children once they are brought into this world. The facts of the case being that you cannot prove a genetic or biological cause for the root of homosexuality causes the issue of homosexual treatment under law to, by definition, be required to be treated as different than, for instance, race under law. Race has a genetic component to it that no man can change. Race is going to be what DNA decides it's going to be, and God decides that. So there's not really any other possibility for that genetic component to be changed. In the issue of homosexual relationships and how people engage sexually with other people, everything in that scenario is built upon choice. Now, the only thing that people are still arguing is that, and they're not arguing that genetics make anyone do anything, they're just arguing that I'm just born that way. And if I am born that way, then I'm obviously a slave to my condition, therefore I must be treated as people of different races would be treated, because they are genetically enslaved to their DNA and to their genetics. It's a false argument, friend. It's a 100% false argument. The sexual behavior and expression is as fluid and has as much variety to it as there are stars in the sky. And the studies that demonstrate that are actually quite revealing, and some of them are quite modern. There was a study done 2 years ago that looked, at something like 30 years worth of females that went through high school and college and early adult life, and they tracked all of them through their early adult life. Some of these girls were very, very promiscuous and experimental when it came to sex in high school and in college. They, in fact, engaged in lesbianism at a much higher degree than people that were younger or older than them. And then a very interesting thing in the study happened. More than 96% of the girls that engaged in all of that behavior, by the time they hit their mid-20s, had decided, you know what, I really do want a traditional family, a husband, children, et cetera, and they settled into, in terms of their sexual choice and identity of that choice, they settled into a traditional model of life that was not experimental, it was not homosexual, it was not all these other things that they had this quote-unquote freedom in younger years to be able to pursue and to explore. When they got into that range of life where they started thinking about those things, they settled their sexual appetite into a range that created traditional families more than 90% of the time. This means that sexuality, at least for high school and college-age girls, is exceedingly fluid. People make decisions and choices and behaviors based on all types of criteria, but almost none of it is genetic or DNA in its composite. So what we're seeing today is a Supreme Court that has bought holistically into the idea that there is a genetic component to the causal conditions of homosexual behavior. They are not examining the issue honestly. They are not looking at it from a human behavioral standpoint. They're not looking at it from a medical standpoint. They're not looking at it at anything else other than someone says they were born that way. Who are we to say otherwise? And that's what we're going to get. I believe that this is going to continue to be the kind of root cause and case of where law goes from here on out. And for those that are church-going people that have very strong opinions about what sexual propriety is and sexual integrity is, and we happen to be a family that fits into that category, friends, just be prepared. You're looking at a government that wants to create control and contrive everything for their benefit, for their ability. This is going to have massive implications on religious freedom, particularly in America. For your ability to stand up and say, I don't know if I agree with that, is suddenly going to be brought into question because the passage of hate crime laws and other things are going to be tacked onto this as the states continue to fall one by one. I'm not saying there's not a fight to still protect marriage. I'm not saying that I'm giving up that fight. I'm trying to give you the roadmap of where I see this ultimately going, and it's not. I'm not optimistic about it. I wasn't optimistic about it when the cases went to the Supreme Court earlier this year, and I am equally as pessimistic about it today now that the Supreme Court has ruled against traditional marriage in both the Prop 8 and the Defense of Marriage Act, which was, by the way, entirely intriguing in terms of how the justices respond. I believe it was Scalia that wrote, "We have no business deciding this law because it was passed by the elected body representing the voters of the United States by both houses by overwhelming majorities and signed by a president into law." And he said, we have no business overturning that process. He did not convince the majority of the court to do that. This was one of those swing votes where Justice Kennedy sided with the liberal wing of the court, and the families of America lost on this day, I think twice. I'll be interested, and I will continue to follow the advancement of how Prop 8 goes in California. But I'm not over enthusiastic about its chances of long-term success. I'm not. And this comes back to something that we were talking about yesterday. If believers are going to be salt and light in the country and in the place where we are placed, then it is time that we become salt and light. And at some point in time, we may be very much in the minority, speaking a truth to a culture that is not interested in hearing it in majority terms. And how effective our stand for what is right, for what is true, what is just, what is good, will be measured quite notably. And I think actually it's going to be a little bit of chaff and wheat separation here, if you're using New Testament terms. But we'll see more about that as it goes on. But the top news story of the day today, both marriage cases, as I was pessimistically fearful of, both marriage cases working against the traditional argument for marriage and family in the country today. Now, there are other stories that are equally important that we need to spend time with, and one has to do with what we're going to talk about in the next segment. There was a report that came out by the Investigative Project on Terrorism, and I'm not super familiar with that group. I've seen some of their stuff in the past, but they have secured an exclusive that was released today that said that the White House had met with the assistant to a cleric who is so radical that he is not even allowed into the U.S. Why did they do that? What difference does it make? And are elements of radical Islam using our own laws, our own legal systems, to supplant and to thwart the welfare of the American people? Brooke Goldstein, director and CEO of the Lawfare Project, joins us next to discuss that from her offices in Manhattan. We are glad that you're with us today. It's a big news day here on AFA Today. Kevin McCullough coming right back from New York. Stay with us.